Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for this month's Curator's Tour. For those of you who don't know, I'm Elizabeth Kilmer, Exhibitions Content Manager here at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. And today we are excited to talk to you about our permanent collection exhibition called The Bronze, the Artistic Interest. And this entire exhibition consists solely of bronze statues from our own permanent collection. Now, excuse me. Bronze has a long history in art. Ever since the beginning of the Bronze Age, when men started to use bronze for utilitarian objects such as shields and tools and weapons, artists soon started to use it for sculptures. And it has stayed, even though we don't use bronze for tools anymore, it's still used in art. And that is because it is so much stronger and it's almost indestructible, especially compared to ceramic or stone sculptures. If you think about some of the old Greek and Roman statues that are made out of bronze, they're almost always missing an arm or a leg or even their heads. And that's because stone is much more brittle. So
you said statues made out of bronze.
Statues made out of marble or ceramic, with those statues, if they have an arm that is outstretched or anywhere away from the body, over time that stone will become weak or it's vulnerable from the beginning and that arm can break off. So that's why you have so many stone statues, not bronze statues, missing appendages. Whereas bronze, as we will see in this exhibition, due to its strength and due to its durability, it lends itself to much more dynamic sculptures that are full of movement and full of more free of postures for their figures. And that's what we see here. Another thing we'll look at in this exhibition are the different subjects that often crop up in bronze sculpture. Those tend to be religious or mythological figures, but then also contemporary abstract art as well, as the media has continued to be popular with contemporary artists. Now, the first sculpture we will look at is in fact a biblical subject. In this sculpture, we have a scene depicting Salome. Salome is believed to be the stepdaughter of Herod from the New Testament, who is the reason why John the Baptist's head was served on a platter to Herod. The story goes that Herod's stepdaughter was doing a dance, often interpreted as a very racy dance, and we can see that in her scantily clad attire. And she was offered a gift by Herod. He asked her what she wanted, and she said, "I want John the Baptist's head on a silver platter." And so here we have Salome dancing with her scarf or with a piece of fabric in some kind of fancy pose. And we also have something interesting down here at the bottom of the sculpture that tells us the entire story. Lightly etched, I'm not sure how well you can see it with the light, we have John the Baptist's head with a sword through it on a platter. So with this one sculpture, we have Salome dancing, and with the way that Meyer has constructed this composition, we start with her swath of fabric that's looping up away from her body, down onto her arms, onto her head, which then takes us down to John. We have an entire story within one instance captured in bronze. So we will move on to our next sculpture. This sculpture is by Jean-Alexandre Joseph Valliere, and this one contains much less imagery than the Salome sculpture does. This one, at first glance, it really just looks like an active woman in motion. We can see that she's up on one leg. Judging by her posture, she appears to be releasing an arrow from a bow that only half of which survives. But we don't really necessarily know who she is. If you didn't know the imagery that goes along with certain mythological figures. And the figure represented in this sculpture is Diana the Huntress. Diana has been popular since antiquity in sculptures. She's often attributed to the hunt and fertility and childbirth. So throughout history, there's always been reasons for artists to call on her or reference her in their work. Now, usually when you have a sculpture or a painting of Diana, it's much more obviously Diana. Yes, she has her bow here, but she doesn't have a quiver of arrows like she normally would. She's not surrounded by trees or nature or a stag that she's taken down. And she's also often shown with these things passively. She'll have her bow and her quiver, but it'll be lying next to her, or it'll just be on her shoulder. Whereas this Diana, she is in motion. She is in the process of hunting, and she is very lightly adorned. And that is typical of Falguière's sculpture. He is attributed to bringing back more realism to 19th century sculpture. At this point, for the last 200-300 years, the Baroque style had been dominant in France. And what we mean by that is Baroque sculpture had a lot of superfluous detail and fabric that was flowing. It was very energetic and dramatic. And Falguière stripped all of that away from his sculptures, giving us only our figure and her one bow, which is all that he believed that she needed. And so we have a very modern and minimal Diana. Another piece we will look at represents yet another Greek mythological figure. At first glance, again, we don't really know who this is, but in this sculpture by Valdemar Ramish, we have Hyperion. Now, Hyperion was not a god in Greek mythology, but he was a titan. He was a precursor to the gods. And he was believed to have birthed or created the sun, the moon, and dawn, and he was the first to understand the changing of the seasons. So knowing that, we can kind of look at this sculpture, this very simple man, and we can kind of see how Ramish has included very subtle imagery for Hyperion. His arms are situated to almost look like the hands of a clock, counting time and looking at the change of the seasons. And he is also aesthetically beautiful in the vein of Greek antiquity sculptures, where, because Hyperion himself was thought to be a beautiful man, and in Greek sculpture, very slender men and with very plain, I can't find my word, very plain, regular features in the face. And that's what we have here with Hyperion. He's very simple, and yet in his assurance and in his stance, we can see him keeping watch and keeping time on the changing of the seasons and the time of day. And now, the final sculpture that we will look at today is actually a group of 4 sculptures. And it is kind of the highlight of this exhibition. They are the Moods of Time series by Paul Manship. Now, these are actually maquettes. They are not the final sculptures that Manship was working on while creating these. And in fact, these are the working sculptures. That's what a maquette is. It's kind of like a working sketch, a sculptural sketch, for the 1939 World's Fair installation in New York. So the final sculptures were much larger, and they were arranged similarly to what we've done here in the gallery. So with the Moods of Time, they were arranged in a big reflecting pool, and they were meant to symbolize the hours of 12, 3, 6, and 9 on a clock. So they were really part of a sundial for keeping time. And with those Moods of Time, we have the attributing characteristics. So first we have morning, and if we think of ourselves in the morning, we're waking up, we're stretching, And while we don't have roosters or a trumpeter to wake us up, most of us will have alarm clocks, and we see the figure of morning getting ready to take on the day.
He's got a nice big yawn too.
Yes, he does. And then as the day goes on, we have day. Now with day, he is running along, rushing with horses. He holds the sun in front of him. He is chasing the day to take on what is in store for him as he goes about his day. And if we think about how we often are during the day, we are rushing along to get our tasks done because time is money. Especially in the 1930s, we were still in the Depression, but beginning to come out of it. So you're trying to make the most of your day. And as the day goes on, we now shift from male figures to female figures, and we have evening. And one reason for that is because women in art history are often attributed to the moon into evening. So as we go into evening, we now have a female figure who's beginning to relax. She's being lulled to sleep by some owls, which, as we know, come out at night. And we just see her just getting comfortable on this little bank of clouds that accompany all of the figures. Then we come to my favorite figure of the four. We have Night. We have Night sleeping here. She's lounging and stretched out. She's in front of the moon, and she has these little metaphorical nighttime sleeping figures taking her on and taking her to sleep. So, like I mentioned, these maquettes were just the working sculptures for the final installation. And Manship also did other maquettes too as he worked through his large installation. But these are the only pieces from the original plan that were done in bronze. All the others were done in plaster of Paris, which are not very good for preservation. Yes, while it's a hard and dense material, it's nothing like bronze. If it gets wet, it's going to fall apart eventually. So after the World's Fair, the final pieces were destroyed. No one had room for them. They were just taken away and crushed. So these are the only 4 surviving pieces from Manship's in bronze. I'm sure there are other maquettes as well, but these are the only bronze pieces that mark his planing process. And they give us an excellent view into what he was thinking, where he wanted his project to go. And Manship himself was so enamored with this project that he actually recast some other versions for his own home garden to create his own sundial on his own. So it's a fun little tidbit that I always like to think about when I look at these pieces. So if you're able to come into the museum, we encourage you to come in and really walk around these pieces and see how they are really meant to be seen in a 360-degree view and how they really interact with each other. You can see the different personalities or characteristics of the time of day, and it provides a nice narrative and a nice metaphor for something elusive like morning and day and evening and night. Do we have any questions or comments?
Not at the moment, but we hope to see some on the YouTube video in the future or on the Facebook rebroadcasting.
Okay, that's good. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you next month as well.